Ever wonder what it's like when your life depends on a math problem? For the crews of the German 105mm flak gun during World War II, survival wasn't about bravery alone. It was about brutal, unforgiving mathematics. Every second, every shell, every decision was a cold calculation of life and death. Let's break down this terrifying equation. The Flak 105 was a monster of a weapon, capable of hurling shells high into the sky to intercept enemy bombers. But its design had a fatal flaw. It demanded exposure. While some crew members might have had a sliver of protection from a gun shield, the loaders, trainers, and layers were often completely out in the open. They were just as vulnerable as the targets they were trying to shoot down. This wasn't a bug. It was a feature of the weapon system, a built-in probability of death that became horrifyingly real the moment enemy planes appeared on the horizon. To be effective, the gun needed a high rate of fire. Pumping out shells as fast as possible was key to disrupting bomber formations. But this very effectiveness turned against the crew. Each shot unleashed a deafening blast wave. Worse still were the shell fragments. Not from enemy fire, but from their own guns. As the shells were fired, tiny pieces of the driving bands would shear off and rain down on the crew with lethal velocity. It was a constant, self-inflicted danger, a side effect of doing their job. Now let's talk about the business end of the flak shell. When one of these shells detonated, it didn't just create a neat little explosion. It transformed into a cloud of thousands of jagged high-velocity steel fragments. Think of it not as a circle on a map, but as a three-dimensional probabilistic storm of death. Anything inside this expanding sphere of shrapnel was subject to the laws of chance. A bomber flying through it had a certain probability of being hit, but the ground wasn't safe either. This is where the geometry of death comes into play. A single flak battery rarely fired just one gun. They fired in salvos. Multiple shells would detonate near each other, creating overlapping clouds of shrapnel. The probability of a hit didn't just add up. It increased exponentially. An aircraft flying through the intersection of 2 or 3 of these lethal clouds had almost no chance of survival. This was the cold, hard calculus they used to bring down bombers. But this same calculus applied to everything on the ground, including the gun crews themselves, especially if a shell malfunctioned and detonated too low. The weapon's own mechanical limitations added another cruel variable to the survival equation. The traverse mechanisms, the gears that turned the massive gun barrel, were often slow. To track a fast-moving bomber, crews had to physically push and heave the gun into position. This meant abandoning what little cover they had, exposing their entire bodies. Survival could literally depend on your posture, how low you could duck while still doing your job. A few inches could mean the difference between a fragment whizzing past your head or finding its mark. Crews weren't ignorant of these risks. They developed tactics to try and cheat the odds. They might use staggered reloads, so not everyone was exposed at the same time. They rotated positions to give exhausted or shell-shocked men a brief respite from the most dangerous jobs. But these were desperate measures, brutal trade-offs. Rotating a skilled layer out of his position could reduce the gun's accuracy. Using fewer men to service the gun to minimize exposure meant you had no reserves if someone was hit. Every choice was a gamble, trading one risk for another. And then there were the factors they couldn't control. Supply constraints meant they might be short on ammunition or replacement parts, forcing them to take greater risks to make every shot count. The environment itself was an enemy. Wind could alter the trajectory of the shells and, more importantly, change how the fragment cloud dispersed. A sudden gust could blow that cloud of death right back over their own position. Rain, fog, and mud made every action slower, more difficult, and more dangerous. All these variables had to be factored into the grim arithmetic of their daily existence. When you boil it all down, the survival rates were tragically predictable. You could almost write a formula for it. The number of bursts per minute, the area of shrapnel overlap, the crew's exposure profile, the weather, all these inputs led to a single, stark output, the probability of attrition. The grim reality was that the German war machine could produce flak guns in factories, churning them out on assembly lines. But they couldn't produce experienced gunners fast enough. The weapon's very use had a rate of human consumption baked into its design. Men were, in the coldest terms, a consumable resource. The legacy of these flak crews is a sobering lesson in the intersection of technology, mathematics, and human life. They were caught in a system where their survival was a statistical probability, not a guarantee. The only mercy to be found was in understanding those odds in the desperate, real-time calculus of adjusting their position, timing their actions, and hoping the geometry of death would spare them for one more day. Their story reminds us that behind the grand strategies and powerful machines of war, there are always individuals fighting a personal battle against the cold, hard numbers. Thanks for watching. If you found this look into military history interesting, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. We'll see you in the next one.